Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is set to have tons of new characters and a darker story than ever. However, today I wanted to talk about the most important character in the entire game that everybody seems to be ignoring, the Poppy Playtime doll herself, asking who in the world is she, what is her story, and most importantly, what is her role going to be in the upcoming Chapter 3. Like the video if you end up enjoying, but let's get right into it. So, Poppy Playtime, or the Poppy doll, is seemingly the main character of the entire Poppy Playtime franchise, hence her name literally being the game's title. However, despite this, nobody really ever talks about her character. She doesn't show up in the title much, there's no merch or art of her in the game. In fact, outside of toys like Sir Poops-a-Lot or the literal Pet Rock, she's probably the least popular character in the entire franchise. And that's because while researching for this video, there wasn't much to note about her, and her story was extremely secret, especially since we are only on Chapter 3. However, after days of digging and hours of research, I think I've uncovered her story and her place in Chapter 3, and it's much darker than I would have thought. So first, let's get down to the basics. Poppy Playtime was a doll who was originally created in 1950, and as far as we know, was the very first successful mascot of Playtime Co. after being founded in 1930. And we know this because in the original VHS for Poppy Playtime, presumably when she was first created, we could see in their factory tour advertisement, back at the time, the only thing the company sold were these random baby dolls and none of the characters we see around the factory today. And by that same token, she is also the very first real living experiment in Playtime Co. as well. She has her human eyes, literal blood inside her, and the ability to move and talk like the rest. Now, one of, if not the most popular theory in all of the game to try and explain this mysterious creature, is that the Poppy Playtime doll is actually the lost daughter of her creator and Playtime Co. founder, Elliot Ludwig. Since in his own documentary found in his office, we hear he divorced his wife Molly in 1930, and around the same time lost a mysterious family member, which motivated him to create and innovate at Playtime Co. And we know for a fact that this Poppy doll was Elliot's creation, since the doll is made out of poppy flowers and smells like them, and in his own office we could see a log of him experimenting on rats with poppy gel to try and resurrect them, meaning two things. One, that the poppy flower was somehow used to resurrect things in the past, essentially confirming Poppy is most likely his lost family member, and two, that her creation was all an accident, since he clearly didn't know how he created her after hundreds of experiments trying to make it happen again, meaning Poppy, as far as we know, is experiment number 1. However, something I've always found interesting and seemingly intentional about the game is that the Poppy doll, the very first living experiment, was created in 1950. Then over 10 years later, Bron the Dinosaur's toy version was released in 1961. Boxy Boo's toy version was created in 1966. Then the rest of the toys were released between the 70s and 90s. But one question I had was, why in the world were all the monster versions of the toys created way later in the factory's lifespan, despite Poppy being created in the 50s? Well, the answer to this question comes when we look at the Bigger Bodies Initiative, which, if you're familiar with the channel, you know is the initiative made by Dr. Harley Sawyer, who brought up the original idea of turning the factory's lovable toys into monsters using children's experiments to work for the factory for free, presumably using the same technology once used on the Poppy doll decades ago to give life, since they had already been experimenting on it for so long. Now, they never say when the Bigger Bodies Initiative initially started. However, as I mentioned a minute ago, the Boxy Boo toy was created in 1966, with his Project Playtime description actually saying while the toy itself was created in 1966, the design was later used as the base structure to create this monster that we see in the game. And in the second Project Playtime VHS tape, we hear Harley Sawyer documenting the creation of the very first Bigger Body experiment, Boxy Boo himself.
They said it was impossible, yet you defied all odds.
Meaning that if Boxy Boo was the first original Bigger Body and the monster version of him was created after his toy was made, that must mean that the Bigger Bodies Initiative at the very earliest started after 1966. Meaning that all of the monsters we see in the factory outside of the Poppy doll were made post-1960s era, which makes complete sense looking at our timeline where new toys were coming out, with the only exception being Bron, whose Bigger Body was probably just made after his toy. And we can infer that around the time they were making these bigger bodies, they were probably also making live versions of the mini toys as well, as we could see characters like Cappy, Candy Cat, even mini Huggy Wuggies as toys living as well, showing they were using the same technology used on the bigger bodies in their actual toys, presumably to make them more realistic and turn a bigger profit in stores. So clearly, based on this, Playtime Co is far from the friendliest and cleanest company, and as we explore the factory in the game, we learn that they've done tons of other dark stuff behind the scenes, like keeping the children in the prison they call the Playcare, and literally killing any employees who find out about their secrets, which I go in depth on in other videos. However, Playtime Co wasn't always this dark, disturbing company, and in fact, I actually think that the original owner of Playtime Co we mentioned before, Elliot Ludwig, was a good and friendly guy. Because, see, there's not much known about Elliot other than he was the founder of Playtime Co. However, he is often described in his own documentary and throughout documents around the factory as being a generally good guy. And while, as we've discussed, Playtime Co is known for lying and deceiving the public into believing things are better than they were, I actually believe that Elliot Ludwig had good intentions with the toys and Poppy. Since if we go back into his office, you'll notice that he actually used to have things like drawings from fans of his toys hung up in his room, which would be a weird thing to keep in private unless he actually cared about the children he was making toys for. And furthermore, if you don't believe me, look at the Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 teaser trailer 1. In it, we are shown the gas mask and other dead toys while listening to Elliot Ludwig introduce the infamous Playcare location, described as an on-site orphanage program helping any children without parents, saying extremely nice and positive things about it despite its really dark backstory, such as,
"There is nothing more gratifying to my soul than being the reason for a child's smile. We owe everything to these children. That is why it is with enormous pleasure that as the founder of Playtime Co, I announce Playcare, our very own on-site orphanage."
And while you could write this off as another lie from Playtime Co and that Elliot Ludwig is deceiving the public here, I actually believe that these words coming from Elliot were 100% genuine. Because in Chapter 1, we actually run into a poster advertising the original orphanage program to the public, where in the bottom left, they say that we encourage all Playtime Co employees to take part in our mission by fostering or adopting an orphan child. Participating employees may be eligible for additional benefits. Meaning that not only were they encouraging employees to adopt the children from the orphanage program, but they were actually providing benefits to the ones who did. However, if the Playcare was this big secret bad place where the children were being traumatized and experimented on, as we said, why would they encourage people to adopt the children and take them home where they would inevitably reveal the secrets about the toys? It's because, in my opinion, the Playcare wasn't always a bad place, and when Elliot Ludwig used to work there, it was created as a real orphanage program and wasn't used as an asset for experimentation like it is today. So in my opinion, the story of Elliot Ludwig is super simple. He was a good guy with a kind heart who literally just wanted to make toys for people to enjoy, and after tragically losing this mysterious family member, he decided to use his innovation skills and open Pandora's box, creating Poppy, an immortal and resurrected version of the person that they lost. However, while it seemed like Elliot Ludwig and the factory itself used to have good intentions with the Playcare and all of the children, eventually one day everything snapped and Playtime Co became the dark twisted factory we know today. So what happened? Well, based on an article on Playtime Co's old merch website, we could see somebody writing about Elliot Ludwig's life and how he created Playtime Co, with them most notably talking about him in the past tense, saying things like Ludwig was a visionary, Ludwig devoted every waking second of his life, and Ludwig revolutionized the toy industry and brought happiness to millions. The world will never be the same. So it seems like when this newspaper or article entry was written, Elliot Ludwig had passed away at some point. But this then brings up two questions. One, when could he have passed away? And two, as the owner of Playtime Co, who did he pass the throne down to? Well, looking at the paper, we can see that the picture of Elliot Ludwig in the factory, while cut off, was taken in black and white. And in fact, any picture that you look at of Elliot Ludwig in the game, for that matter, is taken in black and white entirely. Currently, as far as we know, there's no color photos of him around the factory, and we can use this to our advantage because while it's hard to get an exact estimate of when color photos started being used commonly, looking at a few different sources online and getting a general estimate, color photography was invented in the late 1800s, but became widely used in everyday affordable cameras between the 1960s and the 1970s. So since there are no color pictures of Elliot Ludwig found, but he is seen in his documentary working on projects as late as Braun from 1961, then we could safely assume he died around the same 60s to 70s era when color photography was first being introduced to regular people. Which, putting that on the timeline of when different toys were created, it starts to show a very interesting pattern, seeming that around the general time that Elliot Ludwig must have died, right after that, the Bigger Bodies Initiative, along with dozens of new toys, began to flood the factory. And this moment right here is when I think everything went wrong. After Elliot Ludwig died, the main founder of the toy company, everything began to get destructed as the vision seen by the man himself was completely gone. And what you'll notice is that while we don't see too much of Elliot Ludwig, the entire factory is almost completely controlled today by who I believe became the new owner of Playtime Co., being none other than Leith Pierre, who is a character we see constantly around the factory, whether that be interviewing people, creating the security tape in Chapter 1, and pretty much everywhere you look in the factory, Leith seems to be watching and controlling. Which makes me believe that after Elliot Ludwig died, Leith Pierre had the torch passed down to him. However, instead of keeping Ludwig's original vision of the factory, Leith saw the entire company and the Poppy doll Elliot had been experimenting with for years as nothing more than dollar signs. And he decided to lock down the Playcare and the rest of the factory, mass producing the experiments at a rapid, inhuman pace while replacing all of the employees with bigger versions of the toys themselves to keep the costs extremely low and to keep the toy output and quality extremely high. Hence why the Playcare eventually became a prison where all of the children inside were trapped and experimented on. The factory became a slaughterhouse where toys and real people combined, and all of the toys in the factory became completely evil. But then, going back to the entire purpose of this video, how does any of this tie into the Poppy doll herself in the game? Well, see, in Chapter 1, we go in and free Poppy Playtime, which she seemed to be very thankful for at the time.
You opened my case.
Especially after presumably being locked in there for Leith Pierre and the rest of the company to study and replicate into other toys for years. However, assuming my theory at the beginning of this video is right and Poppy was Elliot's long-lost family member, which seems to be very true, then this means that the Poppy doll is actually a relative of Elliot Ludwig and was forced to see his entire factory go from this happy place to a dystopian, miserable money machine, and all she could do was watch from a cage helplessly as a doll. So she, in Chapter 2, explores the factory with the player and of course ends up getting caught by none other than Mommy Longlegs. However, when we end up killing Mommy and saving Poppy Playtime, her demeanor seemed to change. From bubbly and friendly at the beginning to emotionless and almost nervous or restless. Before, when we get on the train, she forces us into the Playcare, saying specifically in her monologue that I had so much time to think and reflect. Time to figure out exactly what I would do when free. We will set things right. Terrible things have happened, but I know that whatever I need you to do, you're capable. And when she says things like, we'll set things right and you're capable, I think this is her referencing us killing Mommy Longlegs and freeing her in the first place after being helplessly trapped and studied years ago. Showing that we can help her on a mission to escape and spread the word about what happened after Elliot ended up dying. Others on YouTube have brought up this idea before, like MatPat, who used this as proof Elliot was the prototype for one reason or another, but I instead think Elliot is completely dead and Poppy has looming guilt over what happened to his factory after she was saved by him, which I think she'll be turning to us to solve in Chapter 3 as a human capable of killing these bigger monsters, while she was just a mini locked up doll who couldn't do much. In fact, while it's hard to use this as evidence, in the scrapped version of the Chapter 2 ending, she also says, terrible horrible things have happened and I am the cause. Being able to exist as a doll, it has killed so many people. Referencing how her existence and her proof of concept as a doll in the 1950s opened Pandora's box and gave Leith Pierre and the evil corporate employees of the factory the tragic idea to turn all of the innocent children into lifelike toys. The Poppy doll isn't evil and never was, but she just had a dark past that she is using the player to help solve. And while I don't know exactly where she'll be in chapter 3, it seems like she has put all her faith on us to restore the factory and continue the legacy of Elliot Ludwig and all of the children who were lost.